So Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport. It's the home of innovation when it comes to racing. The race off the track when it comes to the development battle is probably more important than the race on the circuit itself that the drivers are taking part in. The designers, the engineers, the aerodynamicists are always coming up with ways to exploit the rule book to its full potential and also look at any kind of loophole that they can find. And sometimes these loopholes kind of result in the most incredible and downright weird designs in Formula One history. And my good friend Ed has looked up some of the craziest designs. Some of them I've seen before, some that I've not seen before. And if you've not seen them before, yes, they are real. They actually happened, including Ed, one or at least a few cars anyway, one that actually raced that had six wheels instead of four.
Yeah, I think the Tyrrell P34 six-wheelers, when everyone thinks of weird and Formula One or iconic, the six-wheeler is the Tyrrell made with the four small front wheels is most iconic. But there's been other six-wheelers, so we'll start off talking about six-wheelers. Then we'll move on to engines. There's been some odd engines over the years in Formula One, and then aerodynamics. That's where it really starts to get crazy. And the fan car in 78, the Brabham fan car is one of those, but there's also been a lot of crazy things done with wings, things like that. So we'll look at those and just top it off in the end with the two-seaters, which are really more for, not really for racing, but for taking fans around the track. So start off, let's six-wheelers. And of course, the Tyrrell P34 six-wheeler 1976. Jody Scheckter drove this car. It has four small front wheels. The idea is to reduce drag, improve grip in the front. So the smaller front wheels make it a lot easier to move air over the front of the car. And that's really the idea behind all of the six-wheelers that we're going to talk about. Now, it finished Jody Scheckter won the 1977 Swedish Grand Prix. So they came in 1-2. Unfortunately, though, it was abandoned after that year. And this is a real sign of how important partnerships are in Formula One because those were unique tires. And the tire manufacturers really, well, they helped them at first, but they weren't really interested in further development of these tires. And so really the six-wheeler from Tyrrell was eventually abandoned because it was no longer competitive because they just couldn't get the tires that they needed. It was eventually sold at auction for about $1.5 million. So that's probably the most iconic six-wheeler, if not iconic Formula One car, certainly up there of all time. But Williams and March both tried to put six wheels on their cars, but putting four wheels in the back. Now, these cars never actually raced, but the idea behind this was to increase the contact patch in the back, more rubber on the ground, better traction, that kind of thing. And again, at the time, this is in late 70s, early 80s, the rear tires were really big compared to the front tires. So by putting front tires in the back, it was a lot better for airflow. And so smaller tires, less drag, also reduced the distance between the wing and the tire, so you could get better airflow over that rear wing. They were also a bit longer, about 250 millimeters longer, which made for bigger, longer. They had skirts at the time for ground effects, so those were longer. Also was some very good improvement there. Some handling issues because of the greater weight in the back, but those were overcome. And but they were banned before they could even race. So we will never know if the four wheels in the back, at least in the configuration that Williams and March tried, would have really been successful. But in testing, they were actually quite good. Now, Ferrari also went for four wheels in the back, but they took a different approach. And this was the Ferrari 312 T6 1977. They call it a double rear axle, but when you look at it, it looks like it has one axle and the four wheels were stacked. So he had two wheels stacked on each side of the car. Now, they call it a double axle because there was a differential between the inner wheel and the outer wheel. And the idea behind this was to improve grip, stability of the back, spreading the load over 4 tires instead of 2. And once again, smaller tires in the back, better aero, that type of thing. It was tested. It was never raced. It did have a significant reduction in drag because of the smaller tires. Again, cleaner airflow over the rear tires because they were smaller. Also, the smaller tires lowered the center of gravity, which also helped with handling. However, again, it required special tires. There's some complexity with the differential that was between the inner and the outer wheels. So it was never actually raced. The other thing is, because of this complexity of the extra differential and the extra wheel rims and all that, they could never really get the weight of the car down to where it could be competitive. So there you go. Everyone remembers the P34 with its 4 small front wheels, but it was actually tried in the rear too. But the 4 rear wheels were never made it to the track. So now let's switch over to engines. So there's been, for the most part, internal combustion engines, V8s, V12s, V10s have been what's been run in Formula One cars, except for a couple of exceptions. And the first one we'll talk about is the Lotus 56B turbine car. So 1971. So a little bit of a history on this. The turbine car was actually introduced in Indianapolis. And so in 1967, Parnelli Jones drove a turbine car in Indianapolis, and he just about won the race where he had, I think with just 2 or 3 laps to go, he had a failure. The following year, Joe Leonard and Graham Hill, famous for Formula One, qualified 1-2 in the Indianapolis 500. But the turbine car, again, due to mechanical issues, real close to the end, wasn't able to make it. So Lotus decides, hey, did pretty good in Indianapolis. Let's make a version for Formula One. So 1971, the Lotus 56B turbine car came out. It's interesting that this car did not have a transmission. So it's like an electric car, a large amount of torque. And they had this thing called twist and go. Twist and go. What that meant is you could just like sort of fire up get some revs in the motor, let go of the brakes, and away she went. So you just sort of have the axle and the twist, I guess, and then boom, the car would go. The problem in Formula One was that this engine had to be revved. It didn't like having the revs brought down, and it took a while for it to build up speed again, which is okay in the Indianapolis 500, but not so good in a road course. And so what the drivers had to do is actually use the brakes at the same time that they were putting the power on. So brakes would overheat, and it mechanically it never really worked. The other thing is the exhaust is actually right behind the roll bar. There's massive exhaust behind the roll bar, and it would shoot out flames and things like that. And the drivers sometimes didn't really like that, getting big flamethrowers so close to their heads. So that car it didn't really do so well, and although it was entered in races, the whole idea was abandoned. There was I think it was in 1990, the Italian constructor Life Racing wanted to make a more compact engine. And so they decided to get a lower profile, more compact, if they went to a W, so 3 banks instead of 2, which is a V. So they went to a W, 3 banks of 4 cylinders. It's a very interesting looking engine, but engines have to make power and they have to be reliable. And when they tried to qualify in 1990, they were like 40 seconds off the pace of the pole car. So they tried for 14 races to try and qualify. And although it looked interesting and better aero, not very much power. And the W disappeared and has never appeared since. Which brings us to aero. And aero is where you get probably some of the most visually interesting cars. And to start off, probably one of the second most popular weird F1 car, which is Gordon Murray's Brabham BT46B fan car. So, and what the fan car does is it's like a vacuum cleaner that sucks the car down onto the ground. There's cars out now. McMurdy has a fan car that can actually put it upside down on a roof and it'll just hang there. So it's an idea that's been tried for many, many years. This was back in 78. And so you get the fan, makes more downforce, but there was a rule in Formula One. There's a rule that said, hey, no movable aero devices. They're actually coming back in 26, but at the time, there was a lot of worry about reliability on movable aero devices. And this is a fan does move. However, they were able to get around that by claiming that this was helping cool the car, right? Cool the engine. And everyone believed that. So the car actually won. Niki Lauda won the 78 Swedish Grand Prix, but it was never banned. It was never banned. However, at least at the time, it was not banned. And all the competitors were quite upset. And so Bernie Ecclestone decided to voluntarily withdraw the car. And the rumor says that the reason he did that is he was afraid that the Formula One Constructors Association, which he was leading at the time, was going to collapse. And he didn't want that to happen because, as we all know, Bernie later, he was a team owner of Brabham at the time. He later ran Formula One for many, many years. And he was afraid that having all the teams upset at him would sort of ruin his potential and his ambition. So he withdrew it, and the fan car never came back to Formula One. Then you have Aerodynamics making for weird appearances. The first one, notable one, is the March 711 T-Tray, 1971, and it has this like post that sticks out in front of the car, and on top of that, there's a flat wing. It looks like they call it a tea tray, so you could serve tea and crumpets and scones, whatever you want, on the tray. It was used to maximize downforce by getting that wing out in front of the car. Ronnie Peterson had 4 podiums with it and a 4th. They ended up 4th in the 71 constructors standings, but designers came up with better ways of doing front wings, but it was quite an interesting look. Then the Ligier JS5 teapot. So the teapot has this massive air intake, and again, the goal of the big intake is to have better flow of air, optimize the airflow into the engine, better performance, more power. They weren't the only ones. Shadow, McLaren, and Maki, the F101, also had these big air intakes, but Ligier took it to the extreme, and Jacques Lafitte was able to get at least a pole with it. He was 3 podiums, but the FIA eventually actually banned these, and which brought an end to, if you want to call it, the teapot phase, Formula One. Wings. And so some interesting approaches to wings over the years. And the first one we'll look at is the Aeros A2, which is a car that wanted to get the function of wings without wings by making the car into one big wing. So the first weird wing car is a car tried to do things without wings. And so what they did, they took the front wing and they sort of positioned it between the wheels and made the rest of the car into a big wing. It really increased the ground effects. So it was really good at channeling air underneath the car. However, as we saw in Formula One recently, there was a big problem with porpoising, that kind of thing. So it had great downforce and all that. They got Ilka and Moss got 2 P6 finishes, but they got rid of the idea and returned to more of a standard wing car in the following year, 1980. Another one that people mention quite often when it comes to weird-looking F1 cars are the X-Wing cars. The Tyrrell 25 in 1997. And so what racing's all about is to look for loopholes. You can't break the rules, but if you can find a loophole that you think you can get away with it, why not? And so there were restrictions on what you could do with the traditional conventional wings. And they said, oh, well, let's start putting other like little winglets and things all over the place on the car. And it ended up they put these wings that were positioned towards the front of the car on the sides above where the rear wings were to add some additional downforce. And this was in the area when they had the groove tires, if you recall, remember the groove tires. So there was a loss in the groove tires and a Lawson grip, and so they all these wings were all over the place, and they had all sorts of odd looking supports on them, which gave it what's been called the this X-wing. But in the end, it was actually banned, actually because of safety concerns. These parts flying when the cars would have accidents and things like that. So odd looking, very odd looking, probably almost more like an airplane or some sort of a spaceship or something. And it wasn't just Tyrrell, Ferrari, Jordan, Prost, Sauber all tried to do this. Anyways, the X-wing is one example of trying to exploit the rules, get around the rules. But the wildest example of trying to get around the rules, I think, is Ferrari. In at the time, this is 1982, the Ferrari 126 C2 double rear wing. Yes, you can look at the image here. You can see there's two wings side by side. So there were restrictions dictating how wide wings could be, but there was no rule that said how many wings you could have in the back. So Ferrari decides, let's just put two. And the FIA said, hey, sorry, we're not gonna take that. And Jacques Villeneuve had a P3 in the race, and they took it away. So didn't last very long, but again, quite an ingenious attempt at trying to get around the rules. And then finally, although not for competition, the two-seaters. I think you hear a lot about the two-seaters in IndyCar, which is still to this day. If you want to go to the Speedway and other tracks, you can get a ride in the two-seater. But Arrows, Minardi, and McLaren also had two-seaters where you could sit in a Formula One car and feel what it's like to drive around with a real Formula One driver. So there you have it. Engines, wings, six wheels, a little bit of everything. But I guess it made for pretty exciting times because you never knew it would pop up. And nowadays, when you look at all the Formula One cars that are on the grid, more or less, it's hard to tell them apart. So, anyways, you can pick your favorite there. Most people probably go for the P34, but now that you've seen all of these, might be interesting to see what people think is the weirdest F1 car of all time.
Absolutely, yeah. Just going through that, Ed. Yeah, I mean, we ran a poll on F1 Chronicles YouTube page, and the P34 was the winner of that for the strangest F1 car. The fan car was not too far behind either. But if you've got a pick from any of the ones that Ed has given there, let us know in the comments below. As always, yeah, there's just so much to go on with these at the end of the day. I mean, the six wheeler, particularly the Tyrrell, is a fascinating one because quite often with these innovations, they're either really good or really bad. But this was pretty good. I mean, like you said, it won a race at the end of the day. And there was genuine talk, apparently, at the time that six wheelers could become the norm. Because, like you said, from, an aerodynamics point of view, the smaller the front wheels, the better. It would be very good around high speed tracks because of that. An adverse effect of it was a bit of instability. But at the end of the day, they could always develop that. They could always improve on that. F1's amazing at doing that. And even with things like the tires wearing down a little bit faster, they could just make the tires more durable. But because they were the only client that wanted those tiny tires, Goodyear, I think, were the supplier. Goodyear basically said, well, it's not really worth us to spend all this time and money making more of these tiny motorcycle tires effectively compared to the rest of the car. Because like you said, the cars back then, I mean, the tires on the F1 cars are big now, but they were massive back then. So
Yeah,
they
big
really
difference front to back too.
yeah, and if you look at the clips from back then, you can see how big the rear tires are compared to the fronts. So I can definitely see why Williams and March wanted to have the tires the same, and that's something that's commonplace now, but it's not always been the case. Back then, it was common for the rear tires to be far larger than the front ones.
I think there's something else that needs to be said about the relevance that motorsports has
Mm.
to commercial automotive. So if you start going to six wheels or putting a flame throwing turbine in a car, I mean, come on. I mean, it's like, or it's been said, and it's true that you could probably create an F1 car that they're at 5, 6 Gs right now that goes to 8 or 10 Gs, and you have to wear a G suit, just so a driver can withstand it. I don't think we want to put a G suit on when we get in our car, and I don't know about putting 6 wheels on a passenger car. Probably would take a lot of space out from. But you have to stay relevant. The other thing I think that all these weird cars, if you want to call them that, show is that one of the things about racing is when the new rules come out, engineers will pore over the rules, not to figure out how to make a car that fits the rules, but trying to figure out how to make a car that exploits the loopholes. Where are oh, nobody said we can't put 6 wheels on a car. Let's put 6 wheels. No one says we can't put 2 wings on the back. And most of the time, like the fan car was not banned by the FIA. But if you get super outrageous, like, oh, come on, you can't put 2 wings on the back. You're out of here. Your P3 is canceled. So, and the X-wing, speaking of X's, right? Oh, well, no one says we can't put a little teeny wing above the rear view mirrors on a big X-shaped support structure. So, and in the case of the X-wings, there were several of the teams did it. So it took, sometimes the FIA, like in the case of Ferrari with the double wing, says, get out of here. That's not even exploiting the rules. That's like ludicrous. In other cases, like the X-wings, it takes a few races or sometimes even a few years. Or sometimes political ambitions like Bernie Ecclestone's actually just voluntarily says, okay, we won't exploit that loophole anymore. We'll move on. So yeah, it's interesting. It shows you how race engineers think and how technology evolves in motorsports when you look at the weird cars. So it's sort of like it's hitting the extremes, right? And then bouncing back to the middle. So maybe, but it does make the sport more exciting. It might be interesting to say, loosen up those rules. Who knows what would happen? Maybe the flame-throwing turbine car would come back.
Somehow, I don't think so. But yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think so either. I don't think so either. But there could be other crazy designs lurking out there that we may never see.
Well, the thing is, we probably will see something crazy in a couple of years because we have the big regulation change, and I'm excited to see what happens with that. I mean, we always get these crazy things. I mean, you could even say things like DAS that Mercedes had a few seasons ago. I mean, that was something very innovative, basically where they straightened out the front wheels, and again for aerodynamics, and that lasted the whole season. They banned it after that year. But yeah, I mean, we don't see quite as many crazy designs anymore. I think the craziest one in recent times I can think of was the 2014 regulations when those cars were revealed. They had a certain hood ornament, shall we say, for most of the cars, and
Oh,
yeah, Ed knows what I'm talking about here. I mean, it was again for the newer fans, the Drive to Survive generation of Formula One fans. This was a couple years before that, and yeah, we. I mean, I'll probably put a picture up on the screen at some point about them, but yeah, some of the offenders were particularly prominent, shall we say?
yes, and we had to draw a line somewhere, George, right?
Yeah.
And those were on the list, but I think you're definitely you want to include some images of those because I would say maybe we should do another one on what were the ugliest F1
Oh,
cars of all time. And there is no doubt that those would be the ones that come in number one. And there was quite a variety to the front noses in at that time.
yeah. Lotus had the two tusks, the anteater nose, we called
Longer
them.
than the other, right? It was something.
Yeah, yeah, because they had to go down to a certain distance above the ground, but they didn't have to do it for both of them, so they only did it from one. Honestly, absolutely bizarre. One of the things you're just like, what were they thinking? Like, how did they? And they all came up with it as well. It wasn't just one team; they all came up with that similar thing. There were only one or two cars that didn't do something like that, which was just
Thank God
unbelievable.
they got rid of it because I think the aesthetics definitely improved in the years after.
I agree. I agree. Formula One cars look like Formula One cars now, which is good. 'Cause there was a time when they didn't really look that much like them, in my opinion. But yeah, the engine. I've just have to touch on the life engine because this is something I looked up. I've looked up so many different races at different times, and back in the day, back when this was a car, they used to have qualifying and pre-qualifying, and I'm sure. I'm sure I've seen somewhere, I think it was like Mexico or something, where the fastest lap they could actually set because it was that underpowered was like 2, 3 minutes off the fast off the pole time, which is like for a minute 40 lap. It's like how did you make something so bad?
Well, I think that's a great example of how engineers can fall in love with the concept. Oh,
Yes.
I've got this great idea. We'll make three banks and the engine will be low and compact. There's no doubt that when that thing went on the dyno, oh man, this is not making very much power. It must be internal friction or who knows what. Yeah, but it's a cool idea. We can make it work. Let's build a car around it. And we'll put it on the track and we'll figure out how to gain that 2 minutes back or 40 seconds or whatever it is. And I think it's important and I'm sure with the six wheel designs, they're great examples of why are we going to this, if quote unquote, weird design? And in the six wheelers, and that was common, be it front or rear six. The idea was better aerodynamics, improving the grip at one end or the other. Okay, so you go to a W12, better aero, I guess. But with the six wheelers, you still, if anything, right? You didn't lose out, say, on traction and things like that. You're able to maintain the traction for the most part and get the aero on the engine. I guess better aero, really cool design. No one's ever done it, but hardly not near enough power you need to win a race. So you always have to remember you can go weird, but it better have a purpose behind it, right? Weirdness can become commonplace if the purpose is good.
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's what's happening with the X-Wings, wasn't it? A lot of teams were wanting to adopt them, and they did. Half the grid had them for third, fourth race of that season. I do remember Adrian Newey. I don't know if he says it in his book or I just heard it from an interview, but he was designing the McLaren at the time, and someone someone asked him if he was going to put X-Wings on the McLaren, and he's just like, absolutely not. They're hideous. Like he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And to be fair, he didn't need to because the McLaren was the class of the field, so he didn't need to do it. But yeah, got banned shortly after that. One car I will mention as well, and it might well have been on your shortlist, is the Lotus 80. You say about engineers getting married to a concept. That was where Chapman went all in on ground effects, to the point where he created something that, in theory, would have been incredible. I think that the drivers were Reutemann and Andretti that year. Andretti said it was drivable. Reutemann hated it, and he refused to drive it because he was just like, this is just dangerous. But it was just that intense on the ground effect side that if there was any kind of bump on the track, which is back in the late 70s, early 80s, these tracks were a lot bumpier than what they are now. It basically meant that it was never going to be consistent enough. But nowadays, if you did that, it'd probably work because the tracks are now a billiard table smooth.
Well, this whole idea of ultra high ground effects, porpoising is an intermediate effect towards what you just described, right? If you get too much distance between the ground effects and the bottom of the car and the ground, then you lose that suction, you lose the downforce, and that can be dangerous. You have to be quite the driver to anticipate. I mean, I guess you have to read the bumps on the track. Oh, I'm going to lose it here on this turn because there's a little crack in the thing. But nowadays, first the U.S. Grand Prix this year, there was a slight bump going into turn one at Coda,
Hmm.
and we have to resurface the track. I mean, in some ways, the Formula One cars may be a bit more on the fragile side, any kind of bumping and that type of thing. So you do have to make that perfectly clean surfaces so the ground effects and these aerodynamics things have to work properly. But you have to be able to rely on them, and that's I think a reason why they eliminated active aero for so many years. Is
Hmm.
you have to have 99 with a whole bunch of nines after a percent certainty that actuator is going to move the wing where you want it. Otherwise, you're going to go right through that turn into a wall potentially at very, very, very high speed.
Which would not be good. Definitely not what you want. But yeah, no, I mean we could go on about this for a long, long time. There's been so many weird and wacky designs in the history of Formula One. Like I said, let us know yours in the comments below. What's the one that really stands out to you? Is it one that we've talked about? Is it not? And yeah, good luck through our old conversations. Ed kind of hinted at one through that as well. The can you drive a Formula One car upside down on the top of a tunnel? We answer that question in that video and a whole lot more. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Ed. Really do appreciate it as always.
Yeah, and George, looking forward to doing the episode on the ugliest F1 cars of all time. Although it's probably going to be a short episode. I don't know if we want to do that one or not. But yes, thanks a lot, and looking forward to our next chat.
Oh, I absolutely want to do that one. That one should be funny. I've got a few in my head already that I definitely want to put on the shortlist for that, but I'll leave that for that video. But
Yeah, put
yeah,
a poll out there on that one too. Let's see
yeah,
what our listeners think.
yeah. Designs that only an engineer could love. Some would say for that one. So
Maybe one engineer, the one that did it.
exactly that. Otherwise, people are insulting it, I think. But yeah, thanks for joining us here on this conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, comment, subscribe as always on the F1 Chronicle channel. We've passed 6,000 subscribers now, so looking very, very positive headed into 2025, and we'll be back very soon, guys. Have a good one. See you later.
Have a good one.